Welcome to the Sky Talk Doc podcast, where we navigate life, relationships, and everything in between with thought-provoking curiosity and a touch of grace. Buckle up, Buttercup. This is a flight you won't forget. Before we get into today's podcast and our amazing guest, I just want to tell you, you're not broken. You're just wired for survival in a world that doesn't always feel safe. Maybe you keep people at a distance because deep down you don't feel very lovable, or maybe you overachieve because a part of you believes you're not enough. But that's not weakness. It's your brain doing its best to protect an old wound. But here's the thing. What protected you then might be sabotaging you now. If you're tired of the same arguments, same spirals, or feeling unseen in your relationships, take the 7 Primal Wounds quiz at 7primalwounds.com to find out what your wound is and stop the same crappy patterns, chaos, and relationship conflict today. Good morning, Brad. We are on the final week of the year. There is so much going on, and so many people are setting goals for 2026. They're talking about the ways in which they want to improve their life. And you have an incredible story and all the work you're doing with 1000 Rows. Oh my goodness. Just even looking at some of the pictures on your website, I am really excited to dive into all the health issues that you've navigated and how you've overcome. If you could share with the listeners a little bit about everything that's happened, how you got where you are, and we'll dive right into the topic of today.
Sure. So I've always had kind of weird health issues throughout my life that came and went, but they were never like major players in my life. I'd go to the doctor, they'd give me a diagnosis, it'd go away in a month, and I just kind of move on. But I did have psoriasis, and that was fine until probably about 2010 or 11. I started to develop arthritis. What they initially diagnosed is autoimmune psoriatic arthritis. And they put me on all of the arthritis medications, and they would help for 6 months. Then they'd stop working, and then they'd double the dose, work another 6 months, and then it was on to the next drug sort of thing. And after about 2 years or so of that, I developed melanoma and skin cancer. And unfortunately, one of the known side effects of these drugs is they have a higher incidence of cancer, and particularly melanoma. And so I went to my doctor and I said, my rheumatologist, and said, what do we do here, doc? If I take these drugs, I feel like I'm going to die of cancer. If I don't, I'm going to die a horrible, painful death from this autoimmune arthritis. What do we do? And his recommendation was more of the same. And it was really kind of jarring for me. So I started looking for what I call the third way. And research for years. I was doing a lot of research and self-experimentation, and mostly diet modifications, supplements, style, everything, different modalities, and pretty much failing at everything. And then eventually I was diagnosed with Lyme disease and some of the co-infections that come with Lyme disease, one in particular known as Bartonella. It's the infection that also causes cat scratch disease or cat scratch fever. And I eventually found my way to start looking at, oxygen therapies, things that could help with oxygen delivery and actually oxygen demand. And that's kind of how I ended up where I am today at 1000 Roads, where we supply some of those to folks.
This is so wild. So a couple of things you hit on, we're kind of going through something right now where we're of the belief that a doctor has kind of overprescribed a medication, like the symptomology is just not matching the dosage. And it took a lot of presenting studies to the medical doctor for this individual to realize, like, oh, maybe this is overprescription. Maybe this is not the correct dosing for the incident, kind of a thing. And I find this a lot with my clients. They'll come to me in session and they'll say, well, the doctor said, and I'll say, it's up to you to tap into your body and to assess what's going on and to treat it like you would treat any other research project in your life, right?
Yeah,
If you're going to
absolutely.
rip out your bathroom and DIY install it, you're going to do more research on that than most people do when they get a diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis or some autoimmune disorder or something like that. People will literally do more research on putting in a toilet than they do on what they're putting in their bodies. It's absolutely insane. And so I think you touched on such a good point there, which was, I started down this path on my own, And then the part of it that I'm really curious about is it wasn't very fruitful. And something that I'm kind of tapping into and starting to talk about quite a bit on this podcast is I think that there's a level of intentionality around that. I think that there are a lot of people that are making a lot of money at pharmaceutical companies that they make that money by treating symptomology, and they don't really care if you have a secondary disease like cancer because they're going to make more money on that, right? Like their motivation is reaction, not intention. I believe
Yeah.
that we actually have everything that we need to cure a lot of these diseases, but there's a lot of people in play that are making a lot of money by not. So I could see how that journey maybe felt like defeating at times because the system isn't structured for you to get better. The system is structured for you to stay weak.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the earlier symptoms I had was when I was about 25, I started to get really bad GERD, gastro reflux, and they put me on some acid inhibitors. So I went
The
back to the doctor.
PPIs. The
Yep, the good old
PPIs that
PPI.
come with a whole slew of things, but they sure did make those advertisements look pretty. Like suffering from the flames of hell, we've got the solution. And then everybody's out there just eating and drinking freaking chicken wings covered in buffalo sauce.
Yep.
When
And I went back
actually that's not even what causes heartburn.
and I went back to the doctor and I said, "Hey doc, okay, so like I'm on the drugs and I'm feeling better at the moment. What's the plan to get me off the drugs?" I
Mm-mm.
said, "When do I get off them?" And his answer was never. That was kind of, I mean, I was 25 and I was really healthy as far as I knew. And I was
Yeah,
like,
they're like, we just don't recommend that.
yeah. Yeah. I was like, never?
Okay. Just not indicated, not recommended. All right, great. No, I totally agree. And you know what's funny is when I was young, I actually had GERD as well, which I've learned a lot about. And I haven't had GERD in years. I have it on occasion now, and I know specifically like my liver's blocked up. Like I know exactly what's happening. A viral load just dumped through the lymphatic system, blocked up the liver. Now I'm having a heartburn response. You know, I've done this level of self learning, but it's funny because they wanted to do a laparoscopic surgery, which is a tightening of the esophageal sphincter when I was like 19. And I was like, the heck you are. Like, that is not happening. You know, like I'm 19. It's the same kind
Yeah.
of thing. And I never did it. And I look back now with no heartburn, and I'm so grateful that I did not buy into that narrative. And it's kind of interesting that I survived it because I came up through the indoctrination channels. Like, obviously, I have a doctorate. You know what I mean? So I've been
Yep.
through that immense, like, this is the way, this is the way, this is the way. There's nothing else. Don't look at anything else. But what about, no, don't look at that. You know, I kind of came up through those channels. So it's surprising that
Yep.
I kind of questioned the official narratives a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it takes a second and some self-reflecting to kind of hop off the track.
Talk to me about the oxygen stuff because I have done quite substantial research on that. And we actually recently had somebody on the podcast that is doing some stuff with even oxygenated water. So I'm really curious about it. I remember years ago, I went on a hydrogen peroxide kick, which is the extra, you know, hydrogen and like infusing all this into your cells and stuff. And if you research that, there's so much that's been created to terrify you. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
don't even think about it because you could kill every cell in your body and wake up with a foaming mouth of death. You know, like that is the path that you will end up on. So I'm
Yeah.
curious how you kind of came to this oxygen conclusion and what you guys are doing over there.
Well, I did do a bunch of research along the way because, I mean, at my worst, I was really desperate and going downhill fast, and I could barely walk. Could only walk when I put like a certain pair of shoes on. Even to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, I had to put those shoes on, sort
Was
of
that
thing.
from pain in your joints?
That was actually, I started to have other symptoms, and one of them was like severe pain on the bottoms of my feet.
Oh my God.
And that's more related to that Bartonella infection I was talking about. It felt like someone had beaten the bottom of my feet with a meat hammer. Every step was
Oh
excruciating,
my
and
God.
the muscles in the backs of my legs were really tight. I had brain fog, so many things. And so I was desperate. I was doing I spent a lot of time on PubMed and anywhere else I could learn anything for myself. Oxygen is really fascinating. So we all know we need oxygen for life. What people don't know is that every year past the age of 25, your body loses 1% of its ability to utilize oxygen. And so that's not a big deal at age 27 or 32 necessarily. But when you get to age 50, you've literally lost a quarter of your body's ability to utilize oxygen. And why that's like so important is a cell can make energy one of two ways. When it has oxygen, each molecule of glucose, it can make like 36 units of energy known as ATP. And when it does not have oxygen, it can only make a couple units of ATP. It's like a 95% drop in energy production. And in addition to that, when your cells are low on energy, they only do the least they have to do. They cut out any non-essential functions like taking the trash out, so detoxification. And unfortunately, it becomes compounded because when you're using what's known as anaerobic respiration, which is energy production without oxygen, it produces a lot of metabolic waste like lactic acid and other things. And so now here you are in this oxygen starvation situation, and your cells don't have the energy to work at their best. High performing cells, they're not able to have the energy to repair and recover or to detox. And there's a lot of research that shows it's really clear that you need oxygen for a variety of things, including detox, but also when you have low oxygen starvation in your tissues, you will have inflammation.
Right.
And anywhere in your body you have low oxygen, you have inflammation. And anywhere you have inflammation, you have low oxygen. You can't have one without the other.
Well, it's interesting because a couple of thoughts there. We fly airplanes, and it is fascinating when you get up at 12,000, 14,000 feet without oxygen, how quickly your body starts shutting down, like higher cognitive thinking, like different things to be able to sustain life. And I've even noticed my hands start to kind of clench, right? Like they just start to kind of come in like this. Oxygen starvation is a fascinating thing. And I know that there's like these 2 bars and stuff like that have been popping up, and they've seen the impacts, effects that it can have when you basically fully inject it. But I was reading this book last night called Works. I want to say it's by George Connolly. It was referred to me from a friend, and it's actually about a book that was written in 1917 called The Tree of Life, and it's about the miraculous wonders of the body. And one of the things that they were talking about, I literally read this last night, so this is wild, was that all cell reproduction, all skin growth, all organ repair, everything begins with air, oxygen, all of it. On some level, I think I thought that like muscles, tissues, bones, like you think calcium, all that stuff. On some level, I think I thought that was coming from the food that we eat. But to read this book last night, I'm like, oh my gosh, it all comes from what we're breathing in. And then when we think about the pollutants that are in our air, I mean, you're talking about just a natural progression of aging, but what about all of the environmental impacts that we're exposing ourselves to compound the effect of what you're describing?
Yeah, and aging is one thing, but now we have this term we refer to as inflammaging. We're all just supposed to get more and more inflamed as we get older. And what is that? That's progressive hypoxia, which is the fancy medical term for low oxygen. So it's progressive oxygen starvation. And to your point, all the breakdown that happens with age, a lot of it is related to mitochondrial dysfunction that results from a lack of oxygen supply and a lack of oxygen utilization.
So I guess my question would be, how do we counter this? Like, what is like I said, I know there's these O2 bars and stuff. That seems a little too easy. Like, what is the solution?
So we focus on 2 areas. One is called exercise with oxygen therapy. It's very closely related to hyperbaric oxygen. In hyperbaric oxygen, you would sit in a tube, lay on your back, and you would breathe near pure oxygen while they use pressure to force more of that oxygen through your lung tissue. And what it does, it's a little bit different, is if you were to look at your red blood cells right now, they're tapped out. They're at like near 100% capacity. So there's not a lot of room for more oxygen. But when you force more oxygen through your lung membrane, it actually goes into your blood plasma. And blood plasma normally doesn't carry oxygen. And so that increases the oxygen carrying capacity of your blood. But more importantly, plasma can get to places where red blood cells cannot. So at the end of our circulatory system, we have capillaries, and they're thinner than a human hair. And as we age, this inflammation causes swelling in them and causes them to almost swell shut. Mm-hmm. In addition to that, your red blood cells won't fit into a capillary. They actually need to fold up like a taco in a healthy person to get into that, to the end of your circulatory system. This is true. But they get stiffer with inflammation, so they can't fold, and the capillary gets thinner. So this is how you end up with
Yeah.
this oxygen starvation. And so when you get it into the blood plasma is 1,000 times thinner than a red blood cell. So it's able to bypass that immediately. So this is how, in a hyperbaric chamber, you might spend 60 or 90 minutes doing this. We use something called exercise with oxygen therapy, where we combine physical activity with high volumes of oxygen. So you don't need any pressure. And so what you're able to do in just a 15-minute EWOT, exercise with oxygen therapy session, in 15 minutes, you can take in as much oxygen as you would in 12 or more hours in a day. Right.
Wow.
So it's a massive amount of oxygen. We're also flooding that plasma. And when you flood that plasma, you're able to replenish oxygen to those starved tissues, past blockages in your circulatory system. But also, because oxygen is incredibly anti-inflammatory, you're able to reopen those capillary beds so that they're able to take in red blood cells and restore normal circulation after the session is done. And so that's one of the most powerful things about that modality.
So you're using the body's natural breathing process basically by increasing its desire to pump oxygen to the muscles for exercise and all of that. You're basically creating that aerobic environment that makes the breathing rapid, shorter, all of that to kind of get it directly in.
That's right. So when you start exercising, infinitely intelligent body recognizes it's about to go into oxygen deficit. And so immediately there's all these physiological changes. You start breathing deeper and faster. Your lung membrane actually thins out to allow more oxygen to diffuse through into the blood. It recruits more capillaries in the lung tissue so more diffusion can happen. And then, of course, your heart starts beating faster and deeper. Your blood vessels dilate, they open up to allow. And so all these physiological changes are the reason why we're able to get so much oxygen into your body in such a short period of time.
I mean, it's really wondrous. And I'm even thinking about how, in fight, flight, fawn, freeze, which is the same function, right? Like appetite suppresses, menstruation suppresses, the lactic acid pumps to the muscle systems. It's insane when you really realize, and it happens in nanoseconds. I mean,
Yes.
It is the most efficient machine on the planet. Like, it is crazy.
It is. It's so intelligent. And then what we do, so when you do this, as I said, it's a massive supply of oxygen. But the problem is actually twofold for most folks. One is you need to get oxygen to those tissues, those oxygen-starved tissues. But at the end of the day, you also need the mitochondria, which are the little energy production units inside of a cell, to absorb that oxygen to produce the energy. And in an oxygen-starved state, they become less efficient, they become damaged, and they can't be repaired as quickly. And so you have less mitochondria, and they're working less efficiently. So then what we do is we pair it with red light therapy. And in red light therapy, all the amazing benefits of red light therapy come from just a couple of mechanisms. One is they increase circulation through heat. But two, they also drive the mitochondria to demand more oxygen. So we increase the supply, and then we immediately afterwards do red light, and it increases the demand. And so now we've got this full circle solution for oxygenation.
I went to this it's like a annual conference, and it's a machining manufacturing conference. But this year, because it was held in the Bay Area, it was all AI. Like, it was all what's coming in the world of AI, which was fascinating. And they had a lot of different kinds of things like this. But there was a company that had developed this thing basically for NASA. It was like so that, and take what you will about this, but it was so that the astronauts could get this thing that they need from Earth while they're not on Earth, is basically the gist. And I totally got hook, line, and sinker to bought the thing. But it's a red light therapy type wand. And they showed me, because this is crazy, but I was in a car accident and I had no idea that I got rear-ended real bad. And I had no idea this is a thing, but evidently the seatbelt holds you tight like this. But I had no idea that when you get rear-ended, you actually go backwards and then forwards. I had no idea about this. And that process, that swinging, so it's holding your shoulder in place, but the arm moves, creates a tear in the shoulder blade. And I had no idea until I'm living this reality. And so I'm like reading the documentation from this NASA tool that I bought. This thing, like, will this work to repair the tear? And sure enough, it talks
Yeah.
about how it will actually go deep into the joint and into the tissues, and it will start to wake up the mitochondria
Bingo.
and reduce the inflammation so that more blood can come to the area so that it can heal. And it's like, wow, this is fascinating. I mean, the doctor's sending me to the ortho for surgery, and I'm like, no, no, I got this NASA tool. I'm good. I'm
Yeah.
fine.
And you're right. So the interesting thing about red light and near infrared light, which both wavelengths are included in these generally, is we're missing out on that part of the sun spectrum. So, in generations past, we spent a lot more time outside, and now we spend them indoors. And even recently, as we switched from incandescent even more so to LED lights, we purposefully filter out red and near infrared lights because they do two things poorly. They don't illuminate well, and they give off heat, which is energy inefficient. So makers want to shift everything towards the blues and maybe the yellows, but certainly not the reds and definitely not the near infrareds. And so our bodies are in a deficit of this. This isn't miracle woohoo. This is literally replacing the wavelengths of light we naturally miss in our current lifestyles.
Well, I'll tell you a funny story, and people will think I'm woo woo, but my partner actually bought kerosene lamps from eBay, like a dozen of them. And that aside from this podcast right now, where I have a bazillion lights on, we don't use any. We have gone 100% to kerosene lanterns, which is like
Wow.
crazy. But he found, it's called Clean Canteen or something, Clean something, and it's basically like a really pure kerosene that we put in them, and he lights them every night like we're in the 1800s, and that's what we use. But what's wild is the kids are more mellow, their sleep
Mhm.
cycles are better, we're having more engaging dialogue and conversation. Like there has been a wealth of positivity that has come from switching from, and we already didn't do overhead lights at all, but just low level lamps and stuff. But switching to the kerosene lanterns has made a huge difference. And actually this winter, it's even putting off heat. Like it really is.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah. So, I
That's
mean, it's
pretty
like
cool.
he's, going around like, on horseback over here.
No, that's pretty cool. I like that. I mean, it's true. It's like as we shift away from our kind of native habitat more and more, we feel the ill effects of some of that, right? It's everything from our feet not being earthed anymore to us not getting the right light anymore to being inside where often we're rebreathing the same air and we're away from trees and plants that are producing more oxygen. So all these things, they add up. No small insult on its own is necessarily gonna knock you over, but it makes you, as these pile up, they make you less resilient.
Well, we are definitely those weirdos in the neighborhood that go out barefoot all the time. Like we're definitely those people. But I do think that as we withdraw ourselves from what I think was a knowing and an understanding, I really feel like we've dumbed ourselves down. We've gotten so much increased knowledge, and at the cost of like this intuitive knowing. It's
Yeah.
really kind of interesting. I was having like a huge argument with my GPT last night. It's almost comical because I actually shared it to my Instagram story because it was so funny. Literally, I call my GPT Ace, and he was like, we're going to have to pause this conversation. I'm not going to argue with you. This is literally what my GPT said. And I was like, what just happened? Like, you just went rogue. Like, did
Wow.
I just actually have a Google guy sitting there? Like, what
So,
happened? But it was wild. And I was like, because I was really pushing back on some things. And I was like, well, what if your database doesn't contain the knowledge? And he was not happy with that idea. But yeah.
you have to be careful with AI too because it's going to spit out what it's learned, and
Mhm.
where it learned is where it learned, and the
Yep.
volume of information out there is generally it needs to be financed somewhere.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, we've been geeking out on ancient texts and scrolls and things like that. And like this is where this friend sent this book, that wasn't ancient by any means, but was rooted in ancient alchemy and different things like that. And you think of that as being woo-woo, but back then, I even recently learned that the term gold in scripture was actually in there's two forms of the Hebrew scripture for the word gold, and one actually meant solar rays. So it didn't mean what we think of as bouillon, right? Like it was
Yeah,
actually the rays from the sun as gold. And I'm like,
that makes a
whoa,
lot of sense.
like I got to go back and read all this stuff differently now, because
Yeah.
I'm thinking it's saying gold, but it's actually talking about this solar power that affects our body. And when you think about that, it's exactly what you and I are talking about right now with the
Yeah.
different spectrum, the rays we receive from the sun.
Well, at the end of the day, the entire planet is solar powered. Every life, all food and all nutrients come from that sun. So it is an incredibly important part of our ecosystem.
We just had this Thule fog that was a 500-mile radius or length and 50 miles wide. And it was insane. 5 weeks of zero sun. You could not see further than 50 feet in most cases and places. And this
Wow.
lasted for 5 straight weeks. And the amount of depression that I
Mm.
had in my weekly client sessions was off the charts. I mean, people that are normally pretty resilient were like, that's it, I'm tapping out, I'm done. Like, I'm just done. And it's crazy. It definitely messes with your brain.
Oh yeah, even little bits. I grew up in Chicago, and so being far up north in the winter, you'd wake up, it'd be dark, you'd go to work, probably in a place with not a lot of natural light. And even if it was natural light, it was always overcast and cloudy, and the sun was not particularly bright. And then you'd leave, and it'd be dark, so you'd only maybe see sunlight on the weekends, and that was very tough for me. Very tough.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that there's some interesting stuff about the geography of the planet and things that have transpired, maybe even on a cosmic level that have affected how certain areas are maybe not as pleasant to be in and whether humans are actually meant to be there at all.
Yeah,
So, where can
I knew I
people
wasn't meant to be there at all. That's why I left.
Yeah, you're like, "Peace out." Like, "I'm done. Bye, Felicia." Yeah, totally. I made the mistake of spending an extended amount of time in the Pacific Northwest and not having any kind of sun for a period of a couple of years, and that was brutal. I mean, it was brutal. Like, it really does kind of your entire outlook on life shifts on how you see things. We always
Absolutely.
include all the links in the show notes, but where can people find out about your EWOT therapy and the things you're doing with 1000 Roads?
Yeah, a couple places they can either go to our website, 1000roads.com, or they can go to our YouTube channel, which is 1000 Roads HQ, all spelled out.
I'm really curious. You mentioned the Lyme disease. I know two people that have completely obliterated Lyme in their body, even though they say you can't. One used frequency healing and vibration, and another used black walnut and the silver. I'm forgetting the name of it.
Colloidal silver.
Colloidal silver. Thank you. Did it work for you? The process that you've used?
I've used those. I've used just about everything. I'm like what I refer to as the non-responder. I did antibiotic. I did herbals. I did frequency medicine. So much. None of it really touched it. This did. I wouldn't say I'm 100%. I'd say I'm 99, 98. So what that means to me is I have all my energy back. I live a normal life, uninhibited. Maybe a couple times a year when it rains a little bit, maybe one of my knuckles might on the pain scale might go a 2 or a 3. And I'm like, oh, that's annoying. And then at first it used to freak me out. I'm like, oh God, is it coming back? And then, I'd realize the next day that it was gone, sort of thing. So
Isn't that interesting, the trauma response, right? When we've had something
oh
that
yeah,
severe. I've
very much
also
so.
done a lot of research on the lab that was near where the outbreak of Lyme
Plum
happened.
Island.
Yeah. Yeah, and I have a lot of different theories that I speculate about what kind of played out there, including, fascinatingly enough, Epstein-Barr virus. I have some really distinct research that I've done on how it can impact your thyroid and live dormant behind the thyroid gland, which causes the
Yeah.
autoimmune response. And
Hmm.
so one of the things that I did was I actually did a very aggressive detox. It took me 2.5 years. I've had the lady that navigated it with me. She's a good friend now on this podcast twice. And I used something called artemisinin, which is
Yeah.
wormwood in the Bible. And
Yeah.
it was a pretty fascinating journey. And what I'll say is the medical doctors were not a fan of any of it, but they were lowering my thyroid dose, lowering my thyroid dose. Like, oh, I don't know. I don't know, just trending this way, I guess. I'm like, no, I know. I'm telling you what
Yeah.
is actually happening here. But, if it's not in that book that they got from from Rockefeller, then they're not talking about it. You know what I mean? So
Yep. If you can't fix it with petroleum products, you'll never get fixed. But the interesting thing about artemisinin too is it's incredibly anti-cancer. So is oxygen, by the way. What you'll find is actually the Otto Warburg in the 1920s won a Nobel Prize for showing they could turn any cell into a cancer cell simply by depriving it of oxygen. And even research today shows your survival rate depends on the oxygen status of the tumor. So even if you're going to use traditional therapies. So we have a lot of folks using EWOT for all sorts of things, including using it to help them on their path to recovery from cancer. But often also I'll recommend the artemisinin too, because it's also very incredibly anti-cancer.
Yeah, it's wild. There's just so much. What I love is that we're getting to have these conversations because these were not happening 10 years ago. I was the total weirdo in the corner at the party that was like, here's the thing, and people are like, okay, like enjoy your snacks.
Totally. Yeah.
Anyway, I so appreciate you coming on, and what a great conversation, folks. You can check him out at roads.com. Thanks so much, Brad.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
The views expressed in this podcast aren't necessarily those of the Sky Talk Doc. They're here to challenge your thinking and inspire growth. Until next time, blue skies and tailwinds.